Welcome everybody to the 2018 Gallup Learning Series. I know many of you are back again this year, and so we're excited to have you back. We had over 1,500 people register for this series this week, so we're super excited to have you. Some of you are brand new certified coaches, so we're excited that you're joining this week for the first time and hope that you get a lot of great nuggets out of the content that we have. I want to quickly introduce my colleague, Paul Walters, dialing in from Minnesota. I think that's where you're at today, right, Paul?
That's right, I'm in Minneapolis.
So Paul is, like myself, a workplace consultant, and he and I have the privilege of co-hosting the learning series this week. So between the two of us, we'll guide you through some really great content, great guests that we have joining. There's 7 topics that we're going to cover over the course of the week. These are designed, again, really exclusively for Gallup certified coaches. So if you're wondering who this is open to, who those 1,500 people that registered are, they're all Gallup certified strength coaches. So again, congratulations to some of you that are brand new coaches. Some of you, thanks for being on this journey with us as long as you have. Each of these sessions is going to be recorded. So I mentioned there's 7 different topics we're going to cover throughout the week. You may not be able to join all of them live, but you will have the ability to access any recorded ones that you miss. And our presenters, again, really, we purposefully try to listen to you guys and what you want to hear, where we want to go. So we've got a mix of both Gallup experts and experienced Gallup coaches that are going to share some great learnings content and hopefully help each of you walk away with a few more nuggets that maximize your ability to coach. One question that comes up a lot, and you've got some information on this, but I'll just hit on it quick, and Paul will remind us at the end. But this does classify for professional credit hours. So it's been approved by ICF for continued coach education credits as well. And I'll provide more information, and Paul and I will hit on that, on how you get those credits at the end of the session. So for some of you, I know that's a big plus, that the time you spend this week listening actually will count toward those credits. There's also a feature in chat. Some of you I know are already on there and kind of have begun to kind of say hello or kind of type comments, questions as we go. And we're really excited about the series and kind of hearing your questions. So as we get into the content, feel free to chime those in. We may pull some directly into the conversation, but we'll also purposefully and strategically leave a little bit of time at the end of the hour to just kind of hear any final questions you all may have. So submit those questions as we go. And again, we'll be interactive with you to pull those in. I want to dive right into our first topic then today. And again, I know many of you, I don't want to say good morning or afternoon, and there's people from all over the world. So we're excited that you're here. But the topic we're going to cover is 7 ways to build a strength-based culture. So we're going to explore really kind of 7 strategies that Gallup's found from our best practices and our research to build a strength-based work culture. The session is intended to really help you broaden your coaching presence by learning how to bring those strategies to the leaders that you coach. So how do you and I kind of be aware of those, help implement those, even teach those? If you have that participant guide in front of you that we sent out, this is on page 2 and 3. So you can reference those, kind of jot down some notes as we kind of dig into this topic. I'd like to introduce our Gallup expert who's going to be leading this conversation on these 7 strategies. Ed O'Boyle is Gallup's global practice leader and really has the opportunity to lead all of Gallup's research development, aligns a team of experts and scientists to really help bring those research, those findings, the analytics that we discover about workplace and the world to help bring those to life. Ed brings a lot of expertise to Gallup with backgrounding in branding and marketing, and also has had the opportunity to really kind of be on the front lines as a Gallup subject matter expert. So working with executives and again, helping bring the data to life. I know what you guys care most about is not who Ed is and what he does, but what are his top 5. So Ed's top 5 quick, and then I'll turn it over to him. Strategic, individualization, relator, developer, and activator. Ed, thanks so much, man, for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that introduction. And welcome to all of the coaches out there. Thank you very much for investing your time and energy in becoming a Gallup certified coach. And it's an honor to actually kick this one off. And knowing that you're going to get ICF credit for this is going to raise the game, I guess, for me. I'm going to have to do a better job of perhaps teaching you something. My frame of reference for this entire conversation today is sort of built off of the background of conversations I have with a lot of executives. And basically they start the conversation around things like, oh, strengths, this kind of stuff is really soft. And so talk to me about the business aspects of this. Talk to me why I should care about this throughout my organization. I get a lot of personal development out of this, but can my company, my organization actually benefit from doing this? And so I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the talk tracks that I use with that. And then we'll talk specifically about some of the things that we've seen when working with larger clients on how to implement this. All of these strategies that I'll go through are doable regardless of the size of the organization. And so I'm hoping that you'll get some application no matter who you're working with and what's going on there. Of course, we're going to open this up for questions and comments. My colleagues may jump in and answer some of the questions as we go along, but let's go ahead.
And then you can correct us. What you meant to say was.
I meant it the other way, Jeremy, but thank you for being that nice. Last summer at our summit, I started a conversation with a group that I was working with the notion that a lot of your organizations out there will say something along the lines of your people are your greatest asset. If you go to their websites, you'll see it plastered on the culture page, on the recruiting pages. They talk about how important this is, and based on Gallup's findings in the market. If you had an asset that was working at 15% capacity, you would probably not be very proud of that asset, and you probably would be looking for a way to either sell that asset or replace it as quickly as possible. Well, if you consider engagement as a barometer for how well an asset is producing from an employee standpoint, that's what employee engagement looks like throughout the world. Now, for those of you here in the United States, that number is a whole lot better. It's all the way up to 33%. So that asset is now running at 33% efficiency versus 15% efficiency. And when you think about global payroll of being somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 trillion all in for what it costs to keep these assets paid, and the productivity that you're missing out on this, you start to then weave a conversation around, okay, we've got to do something different. The practice of management needs to think differently around how we're working with our people, how we're driving our people forward. And I think a lot of what we want to talk about through the lens of engagement and strengths is how do we make those assets as productive as possible for every organization. And that, by the way, goes for a nurse working in a hospital, someone who's driving a nonprofit, someone who's driving a corporate enterprise, all the way through the continuum. That holds true. So you think about those assets being totally underutilized. How do we go about making improvements there? So one of the big discoveries that our research team has had is that there's really 4 things that employees are desperate for in a really good manager-employee conversation, right? The first one is opportunities to learn and grow. Everybody wants to turn their developer on in some way, shape, or form, learn on the job, become better at what they do, and expose themselves to new ideas and new concepts in order to invigorate their thinking. We know that when a manager and an employee have a good relationship and they have opportunities to learn and grow, by strongly agreeing to that statement, about 70% of those people are engaged. So when you think about the productivity gains that you can get on that versus the global average, you're starting to really see improvements there. Again, the next one is job clarity and responsibility. We talk an awful lot about what is expected of you and whether or not you have the materials to do your job and whether or not you have the ability to prioritize the work that you're going to do. Many of us know what's expected of us today at work. What we struggle with right now is, who do I owe something first? How do I prioritize that? Who's going to have to wait till later in the day? And maybe sometimes may have to wait until tomorrow. I think everybody is thinking about that right now as they're going through their notes saying, okay, here's who I have to get back to today. So I need help. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, Ed, too, I love that piece, because it's not just, do I know it? Like, is it clear? But is there alignment? And it might be, like you said, multiple people that expect something from me, but are we aligned? Do they know that I'm going to get this done? That's that really clear around expectation. So I think that alignment piece that you just hit on is often, we forget about it. I know my job, but we forget the alignment piece is key.
Yeah, so I've got a clarity of my role, as Jeremy's describing, and I know I'm supposed to do all these things. Help me figure out exactly who gets that incremental effort, that next step, all of those things that we want to have. And then the third one is ongoing feedback and communication. So if you think about ongoing feedback and communication, that means I have to talk to my people, right? And I have to talk to them about who they are as people, as well as who they are as employees. Those conversations need to be future oriented. Those conversations need to be around where we're going together, about the purpose of the organization and how you perhaps fit in the culture and all those other things. And we know, based on Gallup research, that having those conversations is not the easiest thing in the world for managers to do. In fact, very few managers would tell you that they're extraordinarily comfortable about having those kinds of conversations with folks. So why do we want to have a culture that's more strengths-based? Is so that we can create a lexicon inside of the organization where those conversations can take place, where it's a lot easier for people to understand each other, start those dialogues, and then use on an ongoing basis our own strengths, so that we can actually know what to talk about and when. So when you start to think about a culture that includes Clifton strengths as part of their ongoing communication and strategy, how does that all work, and why should that come to life? And you can see on this page 2 here, we wanted to make sure that you knew that that you were working with one of the best tools out there in terms of metadata from both an individual standpoint as well as from a team standpoint, that you will see improvements. And I apologize, I'm going to have to put my glasses on to get these numbers. You'll see improvements in performance, in higher customer outcomes, in higher employee engagement, in increased citizenship. And basically, increased citizenship is things like participation in community service days, 401k, doing your health-related types of things that inside of your organization. So when you're talking about citizenship, those are some of the things that that you'll get out of that. And so you can see that those links on a performance basis coming to life, and on a team basis, on a work group basis, they do as well. And so,
and just to underscore that too, I think this comes back to your earlier point. A lot of times executives see Clifton strengths as this HR assessment, gives you these 5 fuzzy words. And I love what you're doing again, is just saying, do you care about business results? Which again, to senior executives, the answer is, of course I do. And even just this data, or figuring out they have a turnover problem, and just going in with this, what would it look like if we reduce that by 20%?
That's right. And think about the cost and productivity that you gain by keeping someone there in your organization who's a performer for another year, another 2 years, another 3 years.
Yeah.
Now, I have the privilege of working with the scientists on our strengths practice and the analysis that they've done. They actually walked in, and you can see one of these on page 2, 7% to 23% higher employee engagement. And so, so one of the questions that I asked them is, well, geez, that's a pretty big range, guys. I mean, 7 to 23%. Could you explain to me what the difference is? That's 3x difference between what's going on. The one above it was the one I was really laughing about. I'm like, 20 to 73% lower turnover. Why don't we just call it 0 to 100 and say it's the perfect thing for everybody? And so I kind of forced them to go back and take a look at some of the things that were present when an organization was seeing 7% improvement in employee engagement versus a 23% improvement in employee engagement. And that's where some of the discoveries of these 7 strategies emerged from. So what we found was that if you did the task of doing Clifton strengths, what happened is you saw a 7% increase in employee engagement, right? So doing the activity of just taking Clifton Strengths Finder and understanding your top 5 or your all 34 helped you begin to have a lens into what was going on. But when organizations put a culture around this, built a system and an architecture around making this happen. So not only did you have your strengths, your Clifton strengths evaluated, but did you get coaching on your strengths? Did it unlock who you were and how this all comes to life? Was there education to managers that cascaded throughout the organization so that you knew why we were doing this and how it was important and how you can use it for the good of your team and driving the kind of productivity and performance you were looking for? When organizations put rewards or recognition around not just giving a trophy for strengths, but talking about how people were using their strengths and recognizing those kinds of performance outcomes from that. When you built it into your employee value proposition, on those recruiting pages where you were able to say, hey, my company actually cares about you. And as a demonstration that we care about you, you're going to learn about your strengths and your unique talents inside of the organization. And we're going to nurture those and make those better throughout your career here. Really highlighting on that learn and grow moment. And then lastly, when they took it together and put it into a storytelling mode. So how did you actually romance what was going on inside of the organization? And storytelling inside of all cultures, regardless of whether or not it's an anthropological dig or if it's a corporate culture, is all about how do you manifest the things that are important to you and reinforce those messages throughout the entire company. And so there was a big difference in the numbers, but the reason that the numbers were different is because the actions that organizations were taking or people were taking inside of those organizations were dramatically different when you saw a small lift versus a big lift. So it's part of the coaching conversations you want to have with executives that you're working with is, how big do you want this to be? Do you want this to be a little one or a really big one? And if you want it to be bigger than just you and the coaching that I give to you, and you want it to be more of your team and your organization, here are some very tried and proven strategies in order to make that come to life. And it wound up being 7 things. So I'm going to now pause for a few minutes and see if there's any questions on this first part. And then we'll morph into these 7 strategies and talk a little bit more detail about what's going on there.
Yeah, no, it's great groundwork. One quick question for clarity, Ed, and this might have been misheard. It sounded like you said there were 4 things employees are desperate for. And I think there were three listed out, and then the business impact piece.
Yeah, so the fourth one was accountability. People want to be held accountable for the work that they're doing, and they also want to make sure that their teams are held accountable and their coworkers are held accountable. Okay. We have a question in our Q12, Jeremy, that's my coworkers are committed to doing quality work. That's an accountability metric. We want to make sure that everybody's rowing in the same direction, and hopefully everyone's rowing as hard together. Sorry, I missed that.
No, that's good. That's good.
Good one.
Jim, anything else that came up?
No, not so far. Good conversation in the chat, but keep going, Ed.
All right, folks. All right, now we're going to go into these 7 strategies that help to build a strength-based culture. Okay, so the first one is leadership alignment. What we have found is that without leadership's endorsement, alignment, and commitment behind what's going on here from a strengths-based culture, what you'll find is you'll have pockets of amazing success, but you won't have an institutional change that happens. So things like the team blends for the leaders, talking about how this is all going to come to life, asking them how they want to communicate and cascade that throughout the organization. All of those things are mission critical for them to drive this forward. Even just saying how important this is and modeling the behavior by talking about people's strengths or watching them in action can actually have a massive impact on the way that this actually works inside of an organization. The second one, and again, it goes back to some of those things that we were seeing when we saw that 23% lift, is manager alignment. We can't roll out strengths if managers don't understand the power of them and how it fits into the daily lives and productivity of people. So for those who see the gray in Jeremy's beard, I got a little gray in mine as well. I've worked in some other and Jim has it too. Paul, you've got some years to go, I'm sorry to say. But I've worked in some other places, and in those other places, what happens is you'll have a conversation once or twice a year about, say, your competencies or how you do things best and things like that. And what we find is that when you have managers who are aligned and conversations that are taking place almost daily, if not hourly, around your strengths and how your strengths are coming to life, the whole thing is a different place. So I always joke when I work with executives, I do a lot of employee engagement debriefs and things like that. I'm like, guys, if you're only going to talk about employee engagement in the last 10 minutes of every single meeting that you have, you've completely missed the point. And strengths is the same thing. Strengths has to be woven into the conversations that we're having and the work that we're doing every single day. We have to be able to do this as part of who we are. And without manager alignment and understanding of how that all comes to life, that won't actually work.
Yeah, that's a key call out too, Ed. And I know for a lot of coaches on the line, especially that coach managers, I mean, the number of time we hear from managers or leaders, it sounds great, I just don't have time for it. Yep. and they're misunderstanding what the takeaway is, because we're not saying sit down and have a strengths-based conversation with a team member once a week. What you just said, integrate it, not just last 10 minutes of the conversation. Hey, Ed, let's talk about your strengths, but to talk about it, to be aware of it. I know some execs I was just with last week, the CEO purposefully keeps everybody's strengths on his phone. And it was fun. Like during the conversation, I knew what he was looking at. He was glancing down and he was like, oh, Ed, all right. Hey, I want you to use your individualization here for something, but it's making it, and it even doesn't have to be the Clifton Strengths language, but the focusing on what's right, capturing kind of those key elements. Part of everyday conversations, what you're already doing is what we're hitting on here with that manager alignment or buy-in.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's funny, we wrote a paper this year on that's on Gallup.com around performance management, and as we started to roll out some of the changes that are happening in performance management, many companies are either abandoning or significantly restructuring around coaching, right? So managers becoming coaches and doing a lot more on an individual basis to help their people grow. We asked managers what the number one barrier is to that. And basically what they said is, I have a day job. And so all of these things, while they sound wonderful and I want to do them, I have no idea how I'm supposed to fit that into the other responsibilities that I have. And that's why the easier we can make this as part of the overall way that they manage and get work done through people. So bringing those two things together is really important. The third one you can see I have listed here is internal communications. And I can't underestimate how important internal communications are inside of organizations and cultural change. You can see it's generating awareness and enthusiasm for strengths. What does it mean? It means that in all of the things that are going out, if an organization truly wants to be strengths-based, they have to talk about strengths as a way of winning that new contract, as a way of delivering that new product to market, as a way of reducing costs to a key segment of the company. All of the things that you celebrate as an organization, if you just start to weave in, and here's how this team was used strategic and used developer in order to make these things happen. And we rolled out new training to everyone in the organization around these rules and regulations that had never been done before. All of a sudden, you can start to see things happen. I tell people, executives all the time, if you want to change the culture of your organization, in every single promotional note that you send out, talk about the thing that you want to change in that note before you announce why the person was promoted, right? So, for example, if I just promoted somebody to vice president, congratulations, whoever just got promoted. We're going to talk about how they use their strengths in order to deliver the results that we were looking for in order to promote them to that thing. You do that once, some people will pay attention. You do that 20 times, everybody in the company is now going to start to get, hey, hang on a second. This is really important to our leaders, because every time they mention anything good about the company, they talk about why this person was using their strengths in order to make those things happen. And then you'll start to see people start to behave that way because they want the results to be there as well. It's also a main message that we put into the State of the American Workplace report is that leaders are not really inspiring their employees around the future of the company. In fact, only 13% of people strongly agree that the leaders are making them enthusiastic about the future for their company. And so when you think about a lot of times you'll challenge a leader on that particular data point, and they'll say to you, but you don't understand. We launched that. We had a great campaign around it. We gave out coffee mugs. We had that. Yeah, we had that day, and we did it, right. And so think about the people that are trying to sell you something like a new car or a soft drink or something like that. They're constantly telling you how important that is and how you should be considering purchasing that. And yet, inside of our corporate offices, we stop talking about the things that are most important because we, as Jeremy said, we ticked the box. We had that last week. Now we're on to the next thing. And so we, as leaders, I always say, get bored with our messaging long before our frontline gets bored with it. And we have to be driving that home constantly. And the more you can drive that home through the lens of the things that are most important to your culture and strengths, the more you're going to build a strengths-based culture in your organization.
Ed, one quick question. Stacy Griffin asked this, and she's actually works primarily in higher ed. So kind of hers was kind of ground up from students to administrators. But I know this applies in corporate organizations or environments too. People on the front lines know their strengths, are using it. But, and again, you're talking here of leader alignment, manager alignment, internal communications, we're keeping it alive. Are there any quick tips, strategies? Her question was, what happens when you have to work backwards, kind of from the ground up to get that leadership buy-in? Anything we heard or discovered there that you've seen?
Yeah, we've found that the best way that happens, Stacy, and thanks for your question, is in pockets, right? So what you'll find is that this community group that's the next one on the list. So how do you build those strengths-based communities? How do they become advocates? How do they start to demonstrate success? How do they, cause a positive revolution inside of their organization? And then it starts to bubble up. And what happens is leaders will take notice when a specific team is getting stuff done at a pace that's different than everyone else in the organization. In fact, we had one of our more recent clients, the phone rang, and it started with a conversation from someone in HR going, I have these rebels doing strengths in this group, and they are outperforming everybody else on every single metric that we've got.
Get rid of them quick.
I'm either going to have to get rid of them, or I better understand how to fuel them because they're really getting things done. So there's, don't underestimate the power of a small group with a real purpose, making some things happen. And I think that happens through communities, and those communities then start to bubble up. They will, Stacy, to your question, they will run into roadblocks and ceilings if that item one doesn't happen at some point. At some point, you have to get the leaders to notice that and get them aligned. Now, whether or not it's the leaders in a department inside of a university, or whether or not it's the entire president and university leadership team, that remains to be seen. You can ground up these things for sure. But the other thing that happens when you have a good strengths-based community is that there are people who are advocates everywhere inside of the organization that you can reach out to, right? So on our engagement work that we do, we call them engagement champions. They're people who just kind of understand this a little bit better. And so that I can bump into them and say, hey, I'm struggling with this as a manager. How would I coach someone around this? So someone who has, I don't know, tremendous activator, perhaps, is constantly doing things before they've thought through those things. That was a personal assessment there. But they're constantly doing things before they've thought them through. How can I coach them to keep their activator in line and still wind up getting things done? Those aren't easy conversations to have, and sometimes you're going to need a little bit of a community in order to bounce that idea off of, so that you can get some good coaching on how to do that. Right?
That's good.
So that was item 4, strengths community. Thanks, Stacy, for bridging me into that. Next up is performance management, right? So again, if leaders are announcing all kinds of great things about the organization through the lens of strengths and discussing how this division is outperforming everyone else because they're using team blends and strengths-based philosophies in order to get work done, they're going to take notice on that. But on a very individual basis here, if you build it into the performance management piece, which many organizations will have objective, subjective, and then behavioral metrics that they use when they're trying to do a performance evaluation, right? So do I get the work done? Like, are the results there? Did I do it with a group of people the right way? And am I behaving in a way that's consistent with the way we value future success of the organization? At one company I work for, someone told me early on that, boy, you can get anything done around here because of the position you're in once, but when you bring that team back together to try and get something done again, that second time, that's the true test of whether or not you were a good leader, because they may not support you the second time. And I think strengths is a good part of that. And the more that we can build that into the ongoing development conversation of performance management and wrap that into those coaching conversations that I'll get to in just a second, all of a sudden now you have some magic that's happening. And again, going back to the very beginning, why is it important? Because when people know strengths and we have this embedded throughout the organization, it just gives us easier ways for us to start those conversations about priorities and accountability and doing what they do best, because we know who they are and we know how they're wired, and we can actually help them sort of prioritize their work and make things happen.
And Ed, you referenced earlier, obviously on Gallup.com, we've got a lot more data and research around this topic of performance management. Terry Kelly was even asking, just for clarity on that, when you referenced this specific document, is it that Reengineering Performance Manager document?
Yes, okay. that is exactly right.
Okay, so that's the title, but Reengineering Performance Management. Again, lots of great content out there on this, but to Ed's point, bringing it back to those performance conversations, like we said earlier, that they're already having, or most organizations have those in place. So how do we begin to integrate strengths into that?
Yep. And the beautiful thing is, a lot of organizations that we're talking to right now who are abandoning performance management as an annual review are going to this conversation called ongoing coaching. And for those of you who've ever heard me talk before, through the lens of my personal life, why is it that we actually, here in the United States, the highest paid employee in 38 of the 50 states of our nation is either the football or the basketball coach of the state university? And in our personal lives, when we leave work, we go chase our kids around at sporting events, be it basketball now or football or baseball or whatever the sport is, or soccer of choice. And we value coaching in all of that, and the perfection that someone who's developing our children and helping them learn both how to play the game better, but also how to be a better teammate and how to do all those other things. We value all of that. And then we get to work and we abandon every single thing that we know about coaching and ongoing development, and we get down to doing it completely differently than we do in our personal lives. So we put a tremendous amount of value on coaching in our outside world, but we don't bring it to life here. Mm-hmm. So how do you build those networks of coaches? I'm singing, hopefully, your song, everyone, on this. How do we build this network of coaches? How do we get embedded in these organizations? How do we demonstrate to companies that a really good coach can help you understand how you can be better at what you do and how to maximize the talents that you currently have and be the best you that you can possibly be? And how does that then become a network of coaches? And then how do you teach your managers to coach folks? So not everybody in an organization can have their own Clifton Strengths coach. We'd love it if they could, but it's not possible. But how do we do it at the right levels and then enable managers to do it for their folks and then drive that kind of thing? But it's also an expectation that we've got to coach. We've got to go through the situations as they occur. We have to coach on what happened, but we also have to be very future oriented in the way we talk about it. So a lot of leadership is about next time, right? So we could have done that differently. Let's evaluate it, but now let's talk about the changes that we're going to make so that the next time we do it, we'll make different mistakes than we did the last time that we did it. And that's a lot of what coaching is about.
Hey, Ed, we've got a question from Beth. It's wondering, does Gallup have a strengths-based performance management tool or template or something that we recommend? Any thoughts around that piece?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we do have some tools and templates. What I can do is I'll talk to our folks, and if we can get it, we'll post it out on this group before the end of the week.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. All right, so the last one is one that a lot of organizations kind of forget about, and that is brand building. So the war for talent is real. Attracting and retaining stars is mission critical for almost every organization that we talk to anywhere in the world. And so when you're living those other 6 things inside of your company, I promise you're better than your competition, and you have the right to go out and start to tell people about that and use it as part of your employee value proposition for recruiting new people as well as retaining them, because you can actually say, hey, listen, sure, you can go to our competition and they may pay you 20 cents more an hour or something, but they're not going to invest in you in their strengths, and they're not going to make you a better you. They're not looking out for you in the long run. We are. So it's both a recruiting strategy to hire that top talent and get more stars, but it's also a retention strategy where you're marketing to your own people about what it really is like to work here, and what the gift of strengths can be bringing to you throughout your career here, and that we're going to be the ones who are going to be able to help you unlock all of that, as opposed to having to go someplace else and see if you can do that on your own. So you start to think about those 7 strategies in concert. The last one is, once you've done all of your homework, you get to take credit for that and make it part of your communication strategy.
And Ed, the piece you hit on there too with brand building, I think a lot of times when we're presenting that to leaders, they think external brand, but you just hit on the importance too of internal brand, right? With retention. Talk about what we know too with the importance of that even recruitment of, people, employees. I think at Gallup, that some of our best next employees are coming through our current, Gallup tribe members, that they're going, hey, you've got to come work here. But just, I guess, underscore that internal branding piece that's so important. I think maybe this is a way that we can help leaders to understand, if you're using strengths, you're talking build that internal brand that eventually will draw in your next best employees.
Yeah, when we studied, Jeremy, to that question, we studied millennials. We learned that the number one reason that people leave a job and take another job is opportunities to learn and grow, right? Yeah. So opportunities to learn and grow being the number one thing that people want in a job and leave to go get another job means that Clifton Strengths fits right in the middle of opportunities to learn and grow, because learning and growing through your strengths is endless, right? And so that's why that can become a very, very powerful tool as part of a recruiting standpoint. So you start to talk about that not only as part of your messaging on your career site. By the way, if you're ever trying to figure out, you have a new prospect or client you want to meet, I always spend a few minutes on their career pages, because there's 2 things. Number one, they're usually the clearest that they can be about who they are and what they do. Mm-hmm. Their marketing pages are usually muddied up with all kinds of sales pitches. And they kind of tell you what through the lens of the jobs that they have and the things that they do, what it feels like a little bit to work there. So you can mold your coaching calls or your starter conversations with them into those things if you go and study their career pages. But those career pages are really your employee value proposition manifested to the external audience. And so we know how important having development as part of your roadmap is for millennials. We know it's important for all generations, but it peaks with our millennial workers, and so we need to be driving that forward for sure.
Yeah. What I also like what you're saying here is, specifically when we're talking about higher ed and nonprofits, where there's a lot of resource constraints. And so strengths is free development, right? Oftentimes you get, well, I don't have the money to invest in my employees or develop my employees, but really strengths-based development is low cost, right? So that's something they can do that touches on both the higher ed and nonprofit sectors to really build their brand internally and quite frankly, externally as well.
That's exactly right. Particularly as you cascade it all the way through the organization, the more that people know about their strengths, and with the tools that you all have as coaches, we can cascade that down to frontline associates. The other thing about learn and grow that I always find very interesting is that a lot of times in corporate America, I'm not sure if this plays out exactly the way same in higher ed, is that a lot of times we will actually confuse learn and grow with training and development, right? So learn and grow can be joining a SWAT team to go do manage a summer internship program, right, Jim? Or learn and grow can be taking on a new opportunity within the organization on a project basis. So it could be an award ceremony, or it could be something that's going on inside of the company that has a beginning, middle, and end that you get nominated to participate on that team. But it's a part of your learning. You're learning through the work that you're doing, not learning, in a classroom environment. So as you start to think about those challenges in higher ed, from the student standpoint, they're certainly learning and growing through the classroom environment, the clubs that they join, and the things that they do. But from a workplace standpoint, the administrators and the teachers inside of those environments, they can also learn and grow by taking on different kinds of opportunities, which again is work that the group, even if it's a nonprofit, needs done. and sometimes plugging somebody who doesn't do that as part of their day job can really freshen the team, can really freshen the kind of approach to it, and can be invigorating for both the team and the individuals that are making that happen. And again, coming back to strengths, knowing how to blend your strengths in to make things happen inside of that can actually make those things expedite inside of an organization.
That's good. And quick question that popped up, and this might play back to the second strategy under manager alignment, but Ian Connolly was asking are there any tips of manager alignment specifically in matrixed environments?
Yeah, so a really important thing that we at Gallup are studying quite a bit is that about 84% of workers are living in some sort of a matrixed environment. And so just to level set with everyone, that basically means that you work for somebody, but you do your work with a whole bunch of other teams. And so living in the matrix is really quite difficult, because not only do you need development from your manager, maybe in your functional expertise. In my past life, I was in marketing, right? So I was a marketing person, and I needed my marketing lens to be sharpened. But on the other side, I had a whole bunch of project teams that I was working on, and that was a project management and execution thing. So you almost have two people who can be developing you, and understanding how to make those two things happen in the matrix is really important. It also makes that prioritization piece that I talked about earlier so unbelievably important, because prioritization is driven by demands. And in the old world, and again, the old world is, I used to come to work, I worked for a manager, it was in an environment where the manager has almost complete control over everything that I did all day. It's pretty easy for me to go to Jeremy and say, hey, listen, I can't get this done today, but he knew what else he needed first. So he'd be like, oh, get those other two things done today, and we'll worry about that one for tomorrow. He can't do that anymore as my go-to, because I'm actually responsible for 3 or 4 other people who are outside of the organization, right, who I have to then go and be committed to. So the more that we can use strengths as an equalizer for those kinds of conversations, the better and more productive it is for the company. So we're studying that quite a bit, actually, as an organization, and we'll probably have some more things to say about that in the months and weeks ahead.
That's great. Good. Ed, other thoughts or content you have? I don't want to disrupt your flow before we go to any other.
Yeah, I had one more thing that I wanted to do, and I wanted to encourage people when you're out trying to build this strengths culture into organizations, to really try and think about the work that you're doing in 3 phases, and to help organizations understand where they are and what they're doing. It's one of the things that I think was a big discovery for us, is that we never really communicated to organizations what steady state was going to look like. So what the end meant, not the end of strengths, but the end of the project, so that it's actually in sustainment mode. And so there's really 3 things. When you're in discovery mode, that's when your investment as an organization is the highest, right? Because what you're trying to do is make sure that you're setting the foundation, that you're aligning the leaders, that you're recruiting your coaches, that you're doing all kinds of things in order to make this happen in reality. And you're also working with the communications team to ensure that there is a steady, call it a campaign, about why this is important and how this is coming to life. So that's when you're in the discover phase. And when you finish that, you're embedding it. And the intensity will go down after that. You'll only be doing strengths for people on a replacement basis, right? So new people join the organization, and you're doing it in that way. You're only replacing coaches as a replacement, because either they didn't work out and you wanted to put somebody else in there, or they left the organization and you're using that as a turnover spark. And then when you're in sustainment, it's almost as if everybody at the manager below knows how to coach and use their strengths. And you, as a certified coach, are in there encouraging the leaders to think differently and to drive change, real changes into a whole different territory. So if you start to think about the nuances of budgeting it out, a lot of times when you present to an organization, they won't understand that the first year or 18 months is a discover mode. And a lot of times they'll get anxious to get out of that discover mode. It's the funny conversation that you usually have with organizations is, aren't we done with discover? And then you go back through the checklist. Does everyone know what their strengths are? Are they managing and leading to that? Are we coaching that? Are we communicating that through all of the leadership alignment that we were going after? And then when it's no for like half of them, then you get to go, okay, guys, we need to double down and keep pressing on this. And so that's kind of the last thing I wanted to leave on is you can actually bring this to life by being very financially driven about what that looks like in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And a lot of times what you'll see over the last phase is a reduction by almost half, depending on turnover in the organization, of the investment that you're making day one versus when you're in sustainment mode.
Yeah. Jack, as you were chatting on that too, Ed, that discovery piece and kind of that this really is a process or a journey. Jack was asking the question, and again, every company's a little different. I think he's even assessing that, saying if you had a company without major dynamic issues that needed attention first, is there a specific timeline we would say that we've seen for how long it typically would take to go from people just purchasing and seeing their top 5 to these 7 strategies really feeling understood and implemented?
Yep. And so the it depends that I'd give you, Jack, is leadership commitment and alignment to this. The more engaged the leaders are on this, the faster it'll move throughout the organization. And so we've seen on an expedited basis, we've seen this happen inside of, let's say 9 months to a year. You're seeing real change in the way things are happening and real differences in those engagement data and productivity going up in kind. So you can see major productivity gains in the first 12 months that could start to reinvest and actually pay for this program right away. But the key to that is having leadership aligned on it. And again, going back to that earlier comment, sometimes the leaders are a division, a region, sometimes it's the whole company. But if the bigger bang for your buck is getting everybody on the same page as quickly as possible, but you can move pretty quickly through that first phase.
Yeah, I like how you said that earlier too, Ed. That ground up piece and maybe getting a department bought in, great. That can work over time, but obviously that leadership buy-in piece you just said is going to be an accelerator to people getting around. And that's any strategy across any company. When a leader says, "No, we believe in this," I mean, it truly is lived out, it becomes part of that culture piece. Yep. So Megan Brown had a question. How do these 7 strategies shift, if at all, if you're working with a nonprofit organization or a church?
So I would say they don't really shift at all in nonprofit. In fact, many times that I work with nonprofits, and Jeremy and I have worked with a couple in the past, I would go out and say, hey, I know you're a nonprofit, and so a lot of this marketing stuff that I'm about to bring to you about your customers doesn't really matter. And they'd smile at me and say, without donations, we don't survive, and donations are really our marketing department. And so therefore we need to be driving those kinds of things. So a lot of times you'll hear no margin, no mission, right? It means no donations, no ability to deliver on what we're promising. So now, because these are strategies, right? The way you tactically are going to execute them are perhaps very different inside of a church structure or a nonprofit structure, but it wouldn't be that you're doing radically different things against that.
Yeah, that's good. What about specifically, and this kind of fits that nonprofit piece, but and I know we had somebody present at the summit last year, but Misty Faulkner was asking, are there examples of this being used in actual cities, neighborhoods, communities?
That's such a great question. We have experimented with this with one of our partners to try and drive some of these things into cities. Boy, that would be a very interesting project to go do, and we would be more than happy to help anyone make that a reality, because getting an entire community to rally around this would be just an incredible thing to study.
Ed, there's a number of questions about those 3 phases you were talking about. Are there tools to help assess where a company is in which phase, or are there checklists associated with each phase to help people move along in that process?
So tools, not so much, but checklists, yes. So in terms of for each one of those strategies, there are a few questions that you want to ask yourselves around where the leaders are from an alignment standpoint. So for example, has everyone in the organization taken Clifton Strengths Finder at the at the leadership level? Have they used team blends in order to work with their leadership team? Have they built this into coaching? Can you see evidence of this from a communication standpoint, that they're starting to have conversations about this as a company? May I please look at your performance evaluations, not the words that you've written for an individual, but are some of these things showing up in how you get work done and whether or not this person is moving through the organization? Those kinds of things would be real critical checklist kinds of things that you can literally go in and evaluate. In particular, any kind of artifacts that they have around the way that they talk about strengths. So here at Gallup, on every door in every office that we have throughout the world, everyone's top 10 is listed there. So that would be something you'd put on your checklist. Is there some evidence that strengths is actually cascading through the organization? Wouldn't it be nice if everybody had it on their desk or on their emails or things like that? So there's lots of things that you can put through each one of these as tick lists to make sure that those things are actually being delivered on.
Yeah, and this might play into that too, Ed. Amy Hesting asked the question, and almost kind of think if we're using these 7 as a checklist, she says, if I successfully implement, or we successfully implement these 7 strategies, can we then call ourselves a strength-based organization? And I like the question because I think, man, there are people that use we're strength-based and they're not. It's just
Right.
It's just catchy branding. But is this checklist, especially if we're coaching, consulting with a company, going, yeah, because you're doing these, you can now say that. How would you answer that for her?
I would answer that's a great question, and I think that you're absolutely right. If you're showing evidence of all 7 of these things, and you're sustaining those as an organization, and enjoying the business results and differentiation in the market, then you would consider yourselves to be a strengths-based organization for sure.
Yeah, great. Jim, other questions that are popping up in chat?
I have moved all the questions into our behind the scenes chat. So I think we're pretty caught up. Let's give it one extra second if I've missed a question. A couple reminders, we'll be posting this video to our Facebook group after we're done here. We have a certified only Facebook group. Many of you think that the Gallup Webcasts one is the certified one. It's not. There's about 10,000 in that group. We have a special one. It's locked down. You can't find it. You can't search for it. You have to get invited to it. So if you're not a part of our Facebook group for certified coaches, head over or send us an email, certification@gallup.com. We can get you the invites. We have to verify that before we do it, so it takes a day or so to get it. But send that over, certification@gallup.com, and we'll be moving the links to this video into that group shortly. And I'll do my best to bring as many materials in as I can. If we've missed something, just let me know, and we'll see if we can track it down and find it.
Okay.
So, Jeremy, we'll see. Here's a question. Ian asked, how many coaching sessions do others recommend for each employee in the discovery mode? Is it a one-off strengths feedback? It's a one-off strength session enough?
One-off, no, is definitely not enough. I'll leave it to others to answer the question of exactly how many. But if you're not talking to leaders at least quarterly, I think that's not gonna get the change that you're looking for, because they won't open up about the business cycle unless you're getting in front of them on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, I agree with Ed on that. So I think from the practitioner standpoint, and this may not be for if we're talking about who we're coaching, and Ed just said something that was key too, even that quarterly coaching with leaders. I think leaders and managers, the importance of them having access to ongoing coaching. So if leaders have that built-in cadence of quarterly, hey, that's the commitment, that's what's there. There's some leaders, and many of you out there have monthly calls or more ongoing calls with leaders if they're really working through a tough challenge that you're coaching them around. But I think that regular cadence of coaching, especially at the leader level, and then I think at the manager level too, even some companies have said, hey, you've got 4 coaching calls to use sometime this year, or they're using that internal network of strengths coaches. So they've certified X number of coaches within their organization. But leveraging that internal coaching, especially for managers and leaders, is key. I think the piece that gets sometimes tricky, especially if you got a really large organization, it may be for the individual, it was just a one-off, we gave them strengths feedback. But this is then the power of what Ed was talking about earlier, and we talk a lot about this in our performance management research. If we can help managers to see themselves as a coach, doesn't mean they're doing strength coaching, but if they're then implementing that strengths language. So if you are coaching the manager quarterly, let's call it, and that manager is having weekly conversations with their team members and integrating strengths into that, that's going to create much more sustainment versus we took the assessment, talked to a coach about it 3 years ago, move on. So that's the difference of check a box versus integrated into your culture. Any other questions, Jim, that you have?
No, I think we're good. I think we're good on that. We'll, as we kind of transition out of this, I'll bring up, there's a slide to talk about the ICF piece. We'll bring that up and then kind of wrap it.
Perfect. Ed, well, thanks so much, man. This is fantastic. Appreciate you taking the time and sharing that with us. Paul, I'll let you kind of tee up what's next.
Yeah, great. Well, again, Ed, thank you so much for your time and the insights today. They were great. That silence is a silence of round of applause that's going on, I'm sure, from everybody all over the world watching this. But I also want to thank all of you who participated in the session today and all of you who will be listening to the recording. So we hope the session was valuable for you and that you've had some now effective strategies you can use when creating a strengths-based culture in organizations that you're working with or organizations that you are a part of. I want to get back to what Jeremy was talking about earlier around those professional credit reminders. We'll continue to talk about this throughout the week, but for live attendees, so those of you who are there right now, this session is worth one core competency CCE hour from ICF. Say that 3 times fast. Watch for the event evaluation in your inbox on Friday. On the evaluation, you will be asked to indicate which sessions you attended. Professional credit verification will be sent to you via email as a result of completing the evaluation. And those of you watching the recorded version, you're not left out. You can earn 1 resource development hour for this session. So with that, I want to just briefly prep and prime you for our session that is going to be occurring at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today, which is 8 o'clock Central Time. If you are around and able to join us, please do. We have Mike McDonald and Austin Solentrop will be here to talk about how to increase your manager coaching effectiveness by learning how to tie engagement and performance into your sessions. You'll gain key insights into coaching managers from Gallup coaches with extensive experience working with these managers. You'll learn what the best managers do to engage their people and guide their performance outcomes. You certainly don't want to miss this session. One, because both Mike and Austin are close colleagues of ours and really good at what they do, but also because they are a lot of fun to have a conversation with. So hopefully we'll be able to see you all later today for that conversation. So if nothing else, thank you all for joining us today. We'll look forward to seeing you later today and hopefully throughout the week. Thanks, everyone.